no Simon Reeves, but I thought we might go for a little trip on this. Miss Cumbria. Not sure where the driver is. What do you call the driver on the boat? The captain? The skipper. Where's the skipper? There's even a bar on this boat.
We're now northbound for Ambleside. On the way to Ambleside, we may be making a stop at Brockhall.
I have chosen today the round trip, which is the Red Cruise, to Ambleside, optionally dropping off at Brockholes, but I'm going to hop off at Ambleside to see if I can find a coffee shop before I hop on the return boat back half an hour later. My favourite philosopher, Kierkegaard, I do like to slip him in whenever I can. He made a comment on the possibility of reliving, or in fact reenacting, the finest, most enjoyable moments of his life. And once he actually booked a rail ticket from Copenhagen to Berlin to go to the same opera house, I believe, I'm making that bit up, to see if in practice he could reproduce what he considered to be a most enjoyable experience of his life. He couldn't, of course, because as Heraclitus advises us, you cannot step into the same river twice. Some people might find that rather fatalistic or disappointing, but I don't. Frankly, who would want to step into the same river twice? If I had the choice, which I do, I would like to live by a river, which I do. You can learn a lot from a river. It is at the same time always there, but at the same time always not there.
We're at Millerground Bay. This is the widest point of the lake. Here it is, 1 mile across. Times of old, this is where the ferryman would row people across to match up with the bridleway on the other side and take them to the village of Hawkshead.
So the river is somehow always there, and yet somehow always not the same. Well, I've had to abandon upstairs outdoors. You can see it's a bit blustery and a bit chilly outside, and because I'm nesh, which is a great Sheffield word meaning a sissy, I've come below where it's less windy and warmer, and you'll be able to hear the thrum of the engines of this cruise boat. Well, the engines have slowed down now. They must be coming into Ambleside.
Now if you look up ahead of us, you can see the Fairfield Horseshoe. This was once the seat of the glacier that carved out Windermere 12,500 years ago. Geologists tell us at this part of the British Isles, the ice was up to half a mile thick. Now, ladies and gentlemen, very shortly we're going to be coming into land at Waterhead Bay. This is the landing station for Ambleside. People that are visiting Ambleside, you disembark here.
This looks like a suitable watering place for a coffee, I think. Nice and warm inside. Christmas lights still on in the window. Let's go in and see if we can get a coffee. A lovely cappuccino. Of course, Kierkegaard's idea, big idea, was that if you can reproduce those peak moments of life, then you can exert your will to create a life of your choosing. Living an authentic life of choice was his big thing as the founding father of existentialism. I'm reminded of a peak experience of the children of Israel in the Bible, in Exodus, where they were wandering in the wilderness for, it wasn't just 40 days and nights, I think it was 40 years under the leadership of Moses, and certainly part of that time they were living on manna from heaven, well, actually deposited by birds, rather unappealingly, regurgitated manna from their beaks, I think, like feeding their young. Anyway, this sustained the children of Israel in the desert, kept them alive. But the whole point about manna in the desert is that it only lasted for a day, and it was off the next day, maggot infested, no good at all to man nor beast. So the message is heavenly blessings, or what you might call grace, is only sufficient for each day. In fact, part of my daily meditation practice says just that: receive fresh manna from heaven, grace sufficient for today. Back on the boat, Kierkegaard's conclusion from his attempt to repeat a pleasant experience was very straightforward. He said you can only live life forwards, but unfortunately you can only learn from life backwards, in the rearview mirror, so to speak, which is the same for all of us. What would be tragic would be if we missed life as we were experiencing it, for the reason that the experience passes us by if we are living not for today but for some other future, which may or may not come, of course. So all of the sages of every tradition have left with us this universal wisdom, which is turned into today's mantra of live today, or live for the moment, which has a hedonistic tinge to it, don't you think? But actually is very good advice. The only time to experience anything is now. Who was it that said the unexamined life is not worth living? Socrates, I think. He was onto something so important and controversial that he was actually arrested and tried and sentenced to death for this insight. He took his own life by poison. Very stoically, you might say. How can you be so stoic when you're prepared to surrender life for the principle of living an examined life? It's a strange saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. Examination implies a rigorous dissection or test to see if something is what you think it is, to see if you really know your stuff in an education exam, or in the case of a medical examination, if all your organs are in place and functioning properly. So what does an examined life mean? Well, I think the clue is in the name. Examine life. Examine the qualities of life, its longevity or otherwise. That's a good first question to ask yourself. Is this life simply the time span between birth and death? 60 years and 10, or these days we might be lucky with 80 years. In the words of the song, is that all there is? What happens to us when we die? Is there life after death? Which begs the question, is there life before death? Or indeed, what is a well-lived life? Which is the very subject of philosophy. So what is your philosophy of life? What is its extent? What's its purpose or meaning? I think we could probably all agree that for us human beings, the meaning of our life is something that we inject into it ourselves. It's not something that we get handed out when we leave a maternity hospital, is it? So, in true existentialist terms, you are responsible for your own authentic life, which for Kierkegaard meant making your own decisions how to live that life in the knowledge either of your mortality, in which case why do anything altruistically when you're going to snuff it anyway? The most nihilistic, the most pointless philosophy of life. Eat, drink and be merry. But then if we are not bounded simply by the amount of breaths we take, or in the title of Oliver Burkeman's book, the 4,000 weeks that comprise the average life, if what we are goes beyond our physical mortality, but what if you are more than just the body, more than just your thoughts? What if there is that eternal part of you that never dies, that never succumbs to this mortal frame? That would be a life worth examining, if there is indeed more to it than meets the eye, meets the senses, meets the physicality. So that, may I suggest, is the first question that you might want to ask yourself in your examined life. Is it framed by our mortality, or is there more to it than meets the eye? And if so, how then should we live? Well, here we are back on dry land. We've done a complete circuit, round trip, there and back. It reminds me of the lines, some of my favourite lines from T.S. Eliot. There is no end of exploring, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive back at the beginning and know the place as for the first time. I'd like to add a little postscript to our consideration of Socrates' best advice, which cost him his life: the unexamined life is not worth living. Two coders to that. If indeed this life is simply the space between birth and death, then the challenge is to each one of us to make the most of it, if that's all there is, which of course has triggered and empowered or depressed men and women since times immemorial. If indeed this life is more than just the mortal coil, that we are nothing less than sparks of the divine, then I would say, and perhaps you might agree with me, that's got to be worth examining. And just one more postscript to this little trip. It's just a few days after Christmas and the lights and the trees are still out, and I love all that. I must say I'm a very happy, cheerful Christmas festive goer. I love it. I love it all. Anything that causes people to celebrate, not particularly the Christian religious expression of it, but just humanity having a good time, frankly. Which is why you will see in this video shots of several Christmas trees with lights on. The most remarkable Christmas tree I ever saw, though, was in India. I was staying on a Benedictine ashram called Shantivanam, the place that Bede Griffiths and Henry Lasso set up in the 1950s. I spent a couple of weeks there, including Christmas. And there was the yoga hall, and I was out of sorts. I was sort of being a Billy No-Mate, staying in my little palm leaf cell. And I heard in the distance singing coming from the yoga hall. So I dragged myself out, and they were singing Silent Night, or Stille Nacht, I think in German, but they were singing it in about a dozen different languages. Everybody who was visiting Shantivanam at the time from all over the world took it in turns to sing a verse or the chorus in their own language, which was wonderful. But even so, I only listened from the outside. That's how antisocial I was at the time. And I could not believe my eyes. There outside was a very tall conifer. It might have been a very tall monkey puzzle tree, but I think it was a giant conifer. And amazingly, it had Christmas fairy lights from bottom to top, blinking away. Until I looked closer, and it wasn't fairy lights at all. It was fireflies. So that brought a spark to my otherwise glum Christmas Eve. A real life Christmas tree lit up by fireflies. Enjoy your examination of a life worth living. Ciao for now. And why not examine a life worth living on Lanzarote, with Phil enjoying the 5 Paths experience, which is created to help you be the change you want to see in the world. Check out the website.